Welcome back. Today we're gonna finally look at some more Nier. I think this is only the third time I have, and while I still do want to look at some Gestalt and Replicant tracks, I am gonna do another one from Automata today. And today it's gonna be City of Ruins, also titled Ray of Light. I'm not sure if both terms or both titles are always used, or if people typically just call it City Ruins or something. I've seen different names when looking for the track on YouTube. Also, a little bit of a spoiler that I might have vocals, because I could see there were some that said there were some tracks without vocals, just the instrumental that people had posted. So I am expecting some singing, which has been present in some form, sometimes a highly stylized form in some of the other Nier music I've heard, and I'm looking forward to that because it's always really good. And again, I want to look at the Japanese title a little bit. Just like some of the other tracks we've seen from Nier, there's some interesting changes of meaning with the Japanese. So, as before, they're kind of using katakana stylization to seem a little more sci-fi or more robotic or detached. I'm assuming part of the game has some sort of robotic enemies or mechanical elements, because there's a lot of track titles that seem to do with machinery or automatons, so I'm guessing that's a theme of the story and probably what you fight a lot. So in that sense, it makes sense in the sort of robotic or disaffected nature to use katakana sometimes. But it's also fairly common for sci-fi or even fantasy, because it tends to have such a high amount of Western borrowed concepts a lot of the time that just the loan word nature of the katakana alphabet, used typically for, say, Western names or words that are international and not sourced from Japanese originally, that also tends to show up just naturally in the genre. So there's various reasons why, but I think it's cool that some of the katakana choice for stylization, like in this name, can even source as like specifically as to probably that sort of robot or automaton or machinery sense, which is a more precise way or reason or motivation to use it. So I think that's really cool. In this case, the City Ruins title is in Japanese Isareta Basho, which means more like a place, not specifically cities, and a place that's like left behind. I'm not sure if like colloquially that sort of phrase Isareta does mean ruins, because ruins, maybe they're just referred to as places with a lot of stuff left behind, or if it really is quite a different meaning than the English. A very different sense. A place left behind is a totally different title name than City Ruins, and is more evocative. If we're going for a literal sense, like what if you called it that in English? It was just in English called a place left behind. That would really conjure a lot of differences. But again, I don't know if linguistically, if it essentially means the same thing with how the words are used in Japanese. I don't actually know. But yeah, the part that would mean ruins, Isareta, the Sareta part, you can see the second through fourth characters in the Japanese up there. Those are in katakana. Normally, I believe they would be written in hiragana as just a normal word, and they're stylized with the other alphabet. Again, it's used for more international words, it's used for sci-fi or fantasy for a different vibe, but it's also used for things that are more robotic or a little less human. And the term for ray of light past the slash is basically the same thing. It may be slanting light, but probably ray of light is still a literal translation. But yeah, the City Ruins title is actually quite different in English, barring some colloquial use of these words that are beyond my understanding of the language. But I always find that really cool to look at. And yeah, a little spoiled that maybe there's some vocals in the track, but otherwise I have no idea what this is going to sound like. I know it's an early track on the soundtrack, which doesn't always correspond to when it shows up in the game. Some soundtracks are quite a bit reordered, especially ones with a bunch of CDs can sometimes be grouped in a way where like the beginning and end of each CD on the soundtrack is sort of themed but can be pulled from different parts of the game. Sometimes some of the core early themes in a game are left until like CD5 on some big soundtracks. But for this one, with just I think a couple CDs on it, this is one of the first few tracks. So I'm also guessing this is probably one of the initial levels, which I've seen imagery of. I haven't yet played the game, but I've seen bits of it here or there. So this might even be one of the like initial tracks you get to hear on the game, which means it might do a lot of leverage for communicating the game's musical style and the potential of the compositions, right? A lot of times a game will really want to put its best foot forward on really impressing you, or at least just setting a high artistic bar, not necessarily having to make music that sounds impressive. That can be an aesthetic, but impressing you purely on, say, the quality of the music. It wouldn't be unusual to try to lean a little bit into front loading the music just to really hook people. So if it is indeed from the beginning of the soundtrack, then that could be the case here. Anyways, yeah, let's jump into it. I have no real clue what I'm going to hear. A lot of space given to the intro. I love it. Oh god, that acoustic guitar sounds incredible. So we've got this kind of celestial synth in the background giving this really kind of comforting feeling. Just this overall extra presence to the layers of the sound gives it that, sort of plays the role that like a string section in an orchestration would play. A quiet string section subtly laying down a chord to give a harmonic background, sort of have these celestial synths that are very soft, sort of giving you a sort of very gentle hug in the background, but doing the same role that would in an orchestration, and have these little echoey piano notes. I think some of them might have been like reverbed a little bit, but mostly I think they just have an increased echo, which always sounds really lovely on individual single piano notes. You see this a lot on the Celeste soundtrack, and I might drop a clip here, but Lena Raine's Celeste soundtrack really beautifully does a little bit of audio engineering work on the effects on the piano notes. So when there's some very sparse piano tracks there and single note melodies that are slower, it really has a kind of a beautiful reverberation echo, just a little bit of an effect. It really does a lot to single piano notes. And sometimes people don't always think of piano as something that you can play with to make it expressive in the same way you can something that's more sustained and malleable, like a voice or a stringed instrument or a wind instrument or a guitar. But really, especially if you're dealing with single notes at a time, they're still just like hitting or plucking a string, or strumming one. Essentially plucking would be a harpsichord, but you're still hitting a string in the same way as if you were playing one note on a guitar. It's still giving you a sound like that. You could work with it like you could work with any sound. And single piano notes in these kind of soft, beautiful moments are a wonderful like canvas to actually apply some effects to. And of course, there's not much going on here with it, just a bit of that echo, but it still just elevates it a little bit. It lets it do that job of carrying this gentle little melody so much more clearly than if you didn't do anything to it. And this could be not an effect. It could also be a piano just recorded somewhere with a big echo. Like you could create this effect acoustically in real life, but almost certainly going to be something done digitally. It's just incredibly easy to do like that. And anybody could, either with a MIDI or with a real piano, and then just processing it afterwards. But it works really well. I have this gorgeous sounding, really well recorded guitar, which I think I might have already heard in one of the other Nier Automata tracks. And I could be wrong. I think it was on one of those and sounded really amazing as well. I love hearing really well recorded acoustic guitar, just like any other instrument. But I think maybe acoustic guitar and cello are the two instruments that I think benefit the most for me for being recorded in really good quality with real instruments. Or at least it sounds like it's real instruments here to me. I think they benefit the most. There's something about the tactile sound of it that just gets even a little more out of being recorded really well compared to other instruments, which I also think gain a lot. But if I had to pick a top tier for what I would want to have most of all recorded really well like this, it would be acoustic guitar and cello. I just think there's something about like You can hear the strings, you can hear the plucking or the strumming, you can almost hear the fingers directly. It's just like the difference in impression when I hear acoustic guitar that sounds like this versus something that sounds, it's not as well recorded or it's not real instruments. It's a totally different impression because it can be so simple and it still hits me really hard on a track like this where it comes in and just sounds that clear and beautiful, and really helps to be that quality when it's such a sparse, quiet section. You really want the individual components to stand on its own. A lot like Japanese cuisine, which traditionally, of course, there's plenty of variation, but like at the core is usually characterized as fewer ingredients used more carefully, and with each one being of a really high quality. That ends up making it really exceptional on the whole. Kind of reminds me of that. This opening really reminds me of like just like Japanese cuisine. Anyways, I'm going to go back, listen to this first 40 seconds again and enjoy it, and then move on. Yeah, just this crescendo a bit in this sort of celestial synth. Builds up. Sometimes it sounds a little bit like breathing, a little bit of a wind effect almost sometimes. Just that first strum of the guitar just hits so well. This little piano melody. Actually, I wonder, let me see if I can grab this piano melody. I want to see if I can figure it out. Okay, yeah, that's what that is. And it goes up a little bit higher after a couple statements, but yeah, it goes for a while at yeah, I love that melody. It's a beautiful little melody. It's kind of hypnotic. And then that major harmony out of nowhere. Yeah, now we're getting a little bit more harmonic shifts. Some very clear major minor. Yeah, it's just progressing, livening up a little bit in the harmonic structure. Yeah, and then we get that activity from the percussion. Sort of familiar with this build in the other Nier tracks. Like, of course, most tracks do a build like this, whether we're talking mainstream music from bands and artists, whether we're talking soundtrack music like in games. I mean, build-up of instrumental layering is, of course, a staple everywhere. But this particular way, I think I noticed as the formula in just the couple Nier tracks I've seen so far, not formula like it isn't interesting, more formula like, from what I've heard, and please give me some more details in the comments so I can keep learning about it, is that this is a very dynamic soundtrack, like a lot of games with great music, is that it's quite reactive to the game state. And this probably involves different layers of music. I think that's what somebody told me about one of the others, like the Forest Kingdom music, that it exists in layers that interchange or build up based on what's going on. So that's why I say I recognize this kind of formula, not formula in necessarily composing it this way, but in terms of like how it's being represented on the OST. It might be that there's that peaceful sound, and this percussion might actually be in a level of sort of higher activity in the game, a different layer, or maybe this is still the base layer and that peaceful part, and this is just a natural progression of this section of the composition. But I'm expecting it to keep heightening throughout this soundtrack track to include more of the layers that are supported in the game dynamically based on the action. That's what I'm expecting, so definitely was expecting to hear some percussion come in. But it just sounds great. It's this kind of echoey, sort of deep, but also still a little bit calming drums. It's not adding much chaos or too much entropy, which is good because it's not throwing you out of this beautiful kind of hypnotic stasis you've been in. It kind of adds to it a little bit instead of breaking it up. And I really like that. So anyways, I'm going to back up a little bit, back up 10, keep going to where these drums come in. Oh yeah, it brings in some strings that kind of accentuate the drums, accentuate the harmonies. So beautiful. Wow. Nice major harmony there. I love that. I think they did that earlier. It's hard to not sing along even when I haven't heard it. Yeah. More of these kind of strings going along with the drum hits. Just sort of staccato in the string section. Still have that guitar, but it's subtle. And we still have this, still have that little key thing, actually still more audible, I would say, than the acoustic guitar. It's kind of remained somewhat prominent. So they're trying to kind of keep that as a through line. I think this whole track is going to end up feeling most defined by this little repeating piano shape, looping around like this and being audible the whole time, even more than the acoustic guitar, which was the most noticeable when it came in. But at this section of instrumentation has been pulled a little bit more to the background. You can just kind of barely hear like the impact of the strings on the guitar at points, and the piano's still fairly clear in its own register, kind of in the mix. But yeah, maybe similar to Forest Kingdom. No, Forest Kingdom had a little bit of an odd, like this kind of cool nasally, almost Kodama-esque sort of singing from the vocals there. So it might have been from Wretched Weaponry, I believe was the name of the other track. That one might have had this kind of singing. Or maybe I'm mixing it up and it's from a totally other game that it had this type of singing. Could have been even from like Final Fantasy 16. But regardless, I feel like I've heard this style before on this or a different soundtrack, and I really like it. It's like just changed a little bit from being totally clear. It has a little bit of effect on it, almost like you're not sure if it's kind of a choir, like a multi-tracking effect a little bit, but not really. So it makes it sound like it's still one voice, but it almost has some of the impression of being more than one voice, maybe. And also sounds a little bit unreal. It's both very noticeable that it's not a totally clean, regular voice, but it's also not highly processed. It's just enough that I think these kind of vocals, I would describe them as being potentially suggestive of characters or themes of things that are not quite human. And I don't really know the background of the characters. Like, of course, I know who 2B is, and I know that she's the character that you pretty much play in Automata, and that it seems like she's either a robot or an automaton. That would be suggested by the title of the name, of course, and sounds like it might be a theme, but I really don't know. But because of those hints and sort of assumptions I have about the content, it would make a lot of sense if the idea behind vocals like these on the soundtrack being processed in this way, just lightly, but enough that it doesn't sound completely organically human anymore. Just a little bit. It sounds like 85-90% human. To me, if that connects with some of the identities of these characters, and maybe even overarching themes of the story, perhaps, I don't actually know in that case, then it would be, I think, really clever to, like, you could just process the voice in this style just because it sounds cool and for really no other reason. But I think with as much as you might be aware of, even as a composer, of the details about the game and the story and this world, I think it could easily be an intentional choice that's way cooler even than just thinking it sounds good. Because it really does feel like that almost human voice. And it's just designed just right to give that feeling. But yeah, let's continue. Yep, there's that cool major harmony. A bit of low strings more now. lovely melody. Just really stretched out across these sections. A little more intensity now. What a lovely kind of slide there. It's really lovely. And honestly, even as much as it's not hard for a human to do that, I mean, you know, I can't sing and I can kind of do it. As much as it's not that hard to do it, I feel like you also don't typically hear great singers do it in that super smooth way. I think it's almost something that like people learn vocal techniques to go a little bit beyond that and do... Oh, what's the name of it? It's called portamento. Well, portamento would be what you would call this, but there's an operatic portamento which has heavier vibrato as you're going down, like you know, you're vibrating with the vibrato as you slide. And I think like things like that end up being done as people progress and want to use slides in their singing, or at the very least, like don't do them as straight, but do them a little more of an uneven curve in terms of the acceleration of that slide and where you start and stop and when. So I think having it be such a smooth thing here, almost again, sounds beautiful, but also sounds a little bit like, again, funny because it is something quite easy for anybody to do like this. We just don't usually hear singers do it quite like this. Anybody can do it, but singers don't often in this exact way. So such a smooth and direct slide, again, gives that feeling of like not quite completely human. It's almost a little artificial or robotic, which is, again, really ironic because it's just not hard for any human being to do that way. They just don't usually when you hear people sing and do different slides. And I could be wrong about that as well. Like, totally, like, that's sort of an impression I have, but could be really wrong. Maybe plenty of singers do slides almost exactly like that, and it doesn't have the association I might have here. My takes can be horribly wrong plenty of the time, but that's part of having like spontaneous reactions to art, is that you can be really wrong, but it's still meaningful what it triggered in you, what it made you think of. In this case, that helped for me in this moment to even increase my perception that it's not a totally human sounding voice. It could be doing that for the wrong reasons. That, you know, discussion about the slide, the portamento there, could be totally off base, not even really supporting that argument. But if it does so for me on this listen and makes me feel that way, that's still the reaction somebody's having to the art. So it still kind of has some significance anyways. But yeah, like in this case and many other cases, I'm going to be so wrong about things, and welcome corrections and stuff to always learn, or just differing perspectives if it's not something that's, you know, purely right or wrong, which a lot of things aren't. But yeah, just worth putting out that kind of added thought of a disclaimer that, yeah, could be way off with something like that, but it's still like interesting that it made me think that at the very least. But let's continue. Ooh. Whoa. Fuck yeah. Great harmonic progression. This sounded so good. They haven't done this progression yet, as far as I can tell. Closing out this section in maybe like a half cadence. Yeah, I think half cadence. Yeah, just those 3 chords in a row, just beautiful. I love the effect you can get when you haven't really delved too much into harmonic richness, into either more complicated or more motion-filled kind of chord progressions, ones that aren't reaching to do too much, are okay being a little more static or simpler, which plenty of incredible music written has very, very simple harmonic structures. And something like this, of course, started pretty static and then brought in a little bit of some cool, moments of major or minor chords coming out more clearly in that static feel. You notice them a bit, but because it knows what you're used to hearing, when it brings in these 3 chords closing out this section of the music, and they're so much more interesting than the previous harmonic approach, regardless of whether one's better or worse than the other one, it does really work when you show contrast in it. So I think in a piece that's doing this level of chordal writing from the get-go, I wouldn't necessarily have even had a reaction to that. But when it's framed like this, and all of a sudden it elevates that aspect of the music at one point after 3 minutes of listening. Again, the OST version is probably not reflective of how you hear it in the game. I wonder what layer this is of the music dynamically. But at least in this example, in a vacuum, after 3 minutes of listening and hearing these 3 chords and the section and having them be such heightened interest, it's just awesome. They sound so good. It's so pleasurable to the ear. This lovely little suspension on the leading tone. Moves the shape down a little bit, changes it a little bit, brings it right back. Nice, just lets it go. Again, maybe the OST is just returning us to the base layer of the music, but maybe it does follow this path in the game as well. I love the piano shape changing here. A little space. It's kind of like that 3-chord section ending that we talked about, but in a very sparse way. Bring the vocals in this part. Beautiful melody, beautiful voice. And it plays in so well against the repeating piano shape. They just fit in really well together. The counterpoint between them is really satisfying. I can't stop singing it. I do want to go back and compare the melodies after this section. Okay, 5 minutes and a few seconds. They go into the a little bit more intense singing section. I say more intense, it's still quite gentle, but a little different. But let me go back. Okay, so instead of in D flat, we're actually in B flat minor, the relative minor. So same notes, but minor key. So the piano melody we had was so kind of in D flat. And if we go down to B flat minor, we have kind of the melody that the singer came in with here, which I think is something like that. Yeah, it's... So it fits in pretty nicely with the... They both kind of use this distance of a fifth course, in this case, it actually goes down a minor 6 when it jumps down, but you still kind of feel... You kind of feel that 5th jump descending. Either way, it's a very similar descending leap. Anyways, I just wanted to show real quick that those are actually very similar. Like, they have very similar DNA, which is part of why they feel like they fit well together, because you almost feel when you hear the voice doing that melody, because you've been hearing that piano already, they're not the same melody, but they're shaped similarly enough that it feels familiar to you. Even if you might not consciously recognize it, on a subconscious level, you have a little bit of a sense of familiarity. You know, the voice might sound totally different from the piano, and it might be different notes, but on some level, I think anyone has like a subconscious awareness that they're shaped a little bit similarly. There's something familiar about it. In some cases, people might be really consciously aware that they're similar, but I think it works even if you're not conscious of it. But yeah, let's move on to this next section again. Little slide. Yeah, I didn't realize they actually do 2 of them. Like, there's a little one first. Yeah, it does a little one first, and then it does a bigger one in the next kind of phrase. Slides a bit there. And then a more obvious one there. A little bit of vibrato on that note before. We haven't heard much of so far. I love leaving us with this peaceful section. Whether that's the composition or the decision for the soundtrack, I like it either way. Nice, really giving you this space. Reminds me of the background music they played at this place called Team Lab Digital in Tokyo. Basically a digital art museum with really fascinating, forward-thinking concepts about showing digital art in space around you, stuff that like dynamically, algorithmically changes based on people's actions and will never be the same twice, or spaces that change based on how people move in it. It like shows wind around them, or different light colors making different constructions appear, different things. Really a lot of fascinating stuff at Team Lab. And they kind of had the background music constantly playing that sounded very much like the end here. This kind of celestial wind, you know, some faint instruments, sort of peaceful and meditative, but also thought-provoking. It's kind of funny. It really reminds me of Team Lab. If anybody else has ever been to one of those, let me know, because that was a great experience. It was really cool. Yeah, so let me wrap up. If you couldn't tell, I love that. I've loved everything I've seen from Nier so far. I just really like the approach to the writing. I think there's like a peaceful beauty that comes up a lot, and that's something I really like hearing. Just this kind of restraint and delicacy. But there's also a variety of sounds. There's a really good creative use of vocals on a lot of the tracks that I've seen. I like the atmosphere they're creating. I like the fact that it sounds like they're dynamic and we're hearing different layers on the soundtrack. So it always makes things even more interesting when you know that like in motion in the game, they actually exist as kind of moving creations. They're not just this singular composition. As much as I love those too, I am somebody who, my passion for classical music is around how alive those works are, not around them being... Sorry, my autofocus is, we're still working things out there with the new camera, but how, not about, I love how these pieces are the same every time and they're just so good, they're perfect. My obsession with classical music is actually the dynamic nature of them, the fact that every person expresses and plays them differently, the fact that they're alive and will continue to be explored differently in different interpretations, that even navigating through it yourself at home, just learning or taking a stab at it, is a way to have it be alive in your hands. So I actually like, what I love most about classical music is the way that it is shaped differently constantly in so many forms. So in a way, it's the same thing that I appreciate about games having dynamic music, because when you have digital music, digital compositions, then they really are just one track. Like somebody can do like a cover of them or something. But really, if a game has a soundtrack piece, it exists that exact way in a game, and it's that exact version on a soundtrack. It's a 3-minute digitally created work, then there isn't really room for it to be alive. Like, I still appreciate it, and there's no reason why those can't be masterpieces that I love. But as far as that fascination about the music being living and having so many different forms of representation and interpretation, I think that versions like that who have a single digital existence as one audio file don't quite leverage that fascinating aspect and potential of art the same way that dynamic game music does, as using the art form it exists in as a strength, something that makes it so you never quite hear it the same way, and it's always in context, along with the changing context and soundscape of the way a piece of music is played or interpreted by different human beings. When it comes to music that exists primarily as compositions, when people say they love Chopin's Second Sonata, they're not saying they love like this audio file. They're saying they love the score on the page. And the score on the page, just like the layers of a piece of music in a game that could be combined in different ways, the score on the page is just a blueprint for being put together into sound later in some unique way. So I actually think there's a lot of connection there, and it allows things to reach, even another level above of what's interesting about them artistically. And I love them being alive in that way. But yeah, I'm definitely putting this on some playlists. I currently have Forest Kingdom on Forest Core, and this is City Ruins, but I almost feel like this is a Forest Core track. Hey, let me listen to a bit. Like, what's the most intense this gets? Probably this, but I almost want to say it goes on Beautiful Tranquility, even though I think these tracks, like, primarily don't have much percussion at all. They're confident to stay really subtle most of the way through, if I remember them correctly. And this gets a little bit more intense than that. But I still think it's dynamically gentle enough that I might actually put it here. The other option would be I could argue it kind of sounds like a forest track, but I think because I don't know, I think I'll keep it out of this. Though it might approach it as close as Sunset Waltz, but this maybe had even more of a foresty feel despite not being a forest piece specifically. It's easy for it to go in the calm yet stimulating, but I think it's not. When I say stimulating here, there's a sort of like, again, like an entropy, like a rhythmic motion that you could say are provided by the drums here, maybe, the percussion, but not really. Like there's something more brain stimulating, despite being calm, about some of the other stuff here. I think it's partly the very slow tempo. Like a lot of these communicate maybe a bit of a faster tempo, but they're still calm at the same time. And it's that interesting dichotomy that produces what I had in mind here. So I think that this is going to go here. And you know what I really love about this is that Nier, I think it might be the first game that is in 3 sections. What do we have? I think Clear Obscure did manage to get into dramatic classical and calm stimulating and this, kind of jazz section, which would have a lot of like Persona 5 music, but I already know that soundtrack well. I can't really react to that. I think that's the only... Well, I guess Xenoblade 3 actually does have Orchestrated Energy, Tranquility, and Choral. So Nier's catching up, but what I will say is that Nier is like Clair Obscur. It is 3 for 3. Not that there's anything better, like there's nothing wrong with, being tracks worth saving for me and they're all in the same playlist. But I do think there's like something, it's a bit of a cool achievement if every track so far has ended up in a different category and they've still been favorites of mine. It felt it was worth saving a beautifully tranquil and foresty and calm stimulating track from Nier. Although I will say these 3 playlists are probably pretty close together in their vibe. But yeah, there it is. It's on that playlist. Again, I'll actually make these sometime. There'll be a lot of little playlists, but I will share them sometime and maybe have links in my descriptions when I do. Maybe I'll go back and edit the old descriptions as well so people can go to them. But yeah, hopefully people enjoy listening to those kind of playlist mixes when I make them. Anyways, thanks for watching. Still working out stuff with some new cameras, still kind of getting back into the groove of making videos and kind of regaining my confidence to do some reactions. But hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you for more Nier when I do it, because I definitely will. Until then, have a great time with whatever you're doing with your life. Good luck. Peace.